Howdy peeps, for your friendly neighborhood Monomojos here, speaking to you from stately Monomojos Manor. How are y'all doing? I hope you're having a good weekend. I've had a pretty good one. Work is kind of hectic, whatever, I got a job. Anyway, there's been a lot going on, hasn't there? I'd like to address specifically my thoughts on Ukraine, Unia, the papacy, Russia, with a little comment at the end thrown in about the monasteries, if you don't mind. Won't be too long. Rather than go by and answer everybody's questions, which are very good, and observations, which are even better, regarding this latest thing I posted, which is checkmate, I just want to do a little stream of consciousness thing here. When this was sent to me 48 hours ago, and I immediately published it, the first thing that came into my mind was Nixon goes to China. This was a significant, huge, as we like to say nowadays in politics, game changer. It really was. The Russians, they know how to play the long game, don't they? And boy, aren't they audacious. This reminds me back in the Kosovo crisis, back in 96 or so, maybe 98. And this is at a time when Russia was really strapped, really back on its heels because the economic collapse of Russia during the rapine of all the neocons who were there pillaging the land, and alcoholism rates were through the roof. Things were going bad, but yet there was an audacious Russian general who was part of the peacekeeping force allied with NATO, and he pulled a patent. I don't remember the exact details, but all of a sudden, General Wesley Clark, who was the commander of NATO at the time, woke up one day and found out that NATO and its forces had been beaten to the punch, and there was a Russian division, or at least a brigade, I believe, in that area, and it eventually checked NATO. NATO couldn't invade it. This was brilliant. This is like that scene in the movie Patton where General Patton wanted to beat Field Marshal Montgomery to Messina. I believe it was Messina on the island of Sicily, because the British were supposed to get there first. It had been prearranged. Well, Patton wasn't going to have none of that, and he moved heaven and earth, and he got the 7th Army, I believe it was, there, and they were, a day or two ahead of Field Marshal Montgomery, and Montgomery just was like astounded. What did Frederick the Great say? L'audace, l'audace, toujours l'audace. Audacity, audacity, always audacity. What Metropolitan Hilarion Alfeyev did was audacious. All of a sudden, he shows up in Rome, and I want to get this right. He's standing right by Pope Francis, and Pope Francis said, quote, "There is only one patriarchate in Russia, comma, yours." That came out of nowhere, folks. Nobody expected that. In retrospect, we shouldn't be surprised, though, because the Russians are really good at every now and then doing something audacious. Usually they play the long game. They're in it for the strategy. They put a pawn here, a knight here, a bishop here, sacrifice a rook there, get the queen. It takes years sometimes. But they're good at it, and they've been doing this for centuries. Okay, but every now and then they do something audacious, like they did in Kosovo 20 years ago, and like they did just the other day. And I've got to hand it to them. I mean, this is, even if I was not on the side of Kirill, so to speak, the side in the great intramural squabble that unfortunately is orthodoxy, I would have to take my hat off to him and say, "You go, dude. You did it." So now let's get to the brass tacks of it. There are several different issues here. George Osborne, I believe, commented that this may not be the way I took it. I took it to be that Francis was recognizing Kirill as the sole sovereign of Russia, and that Russia includes the Ukraine. This may have something to do with the Fatima prophecy, which I realize is controversial in Orthodox circles, but I'll speak about that at a later time. So, what's going on here? My take was that Pope Francis was recognizing the sovereignty of Patriarch Kirill as a co-equal primate, and that he has sole authority over Russia, and the identification of Russia is not the Russian Federation, but something broader. In other words, White Russia, Bielorussia, Little Russia, the Ukraine, as well as Great Russia, Rodina, the motherland. That's what my gut told me then, and I'm sticking to it. However, George Osborne perceptively said something that this may be more intramural Catholic politics going on. In other words, the Latin Rite people, the majority of the Catholic Church, what we think of when we say Catholic Church, has a not great affinity for the Byzantine Rite for a number of reasons. But by allowing Bartholomew to recognize the Ukraine as an autocephalous church with its own patriarch, this could work to the detriment of Catholicism. And George, if I'm wrong, please correct me, but that's the way I read you. The Unia has always been a double-edged sword. For the most part, it was a stalking horse that the Latins created to try and divide up Russia, to bring the Russians back into the faith, into Catholicism. And it has sown division, discord, and chaos. And that's what's going on in the Ukraine right now. There's a lot of chaos, a lot of division, a lot of bloodshed. There's been a lot of bad blood because of this. However, it's a double-edged sword. It's possible that once the Ukrainians had an autocephalous Orthodox Church with its own patriarch, then a lot of the Uniates who are in under Rome would seep over into Orthodoxy. And this I see the logic here. I really do. However, I think there's a third point, and I think I touched on it, and that is that Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict XVI, and even Francis have always tried to foil the plans of the West, the EU, NATO, the United States, whenever we've undergone military adventures, whether it was the first Gulf War, the second Gulf War, intervention in Syria, intervention in Libya. All three of those men, I have problems with all three of them, obviously, really spoke out strongly against American foreign military adventurism. Okay, I'm going to take them at their word that they're doing this because they're Christian pastors and they don't want to see unnecessary bloodshed. What Francis did, at the very least, is he removed a casus belli from the chessboard and made it impossible now for the EU and NATO to do what they want to do, which is get in a shooting war with Russia over the Ukraine. That's the way I'm going to take it, at the very least, because that's the geopolitical landscape. Okay, what did he say when he meant there's only one patriarchate in Russia, and that is yours? Did he mean just the Russian Federation? No, I think, as I said earlier, that he sees the breakup of the Ukraine into an eastern third, which is going to be absorbed into Russia, as is the Ukraine. As is the Crimea. and and that the West will probably be ceded back to Poland at some time, with a rump state probably surrounding Kiev in the middle. Regardless, the Ukraine does not have the cultural baggage in the right way, I'm saying it, the cultural history to have their own patriarchate. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, the Ukrainian language is not that old. There is Ukrainian nationalism, but it's not as fervent or as deep or as long-lasting as is Russian nationalism or Romanian nationalism or Greek nationalism. Okay, there's too many. I mean, I once saw a map of the Ukraine. It was a linguistic map, and there are like 11 major languages spoken all over the Ukraine in 14 languages, if memory serves. I'll try to find it. There were, and alone there were like 6 villages and or towns and or cities in which Bulgarian is spoken. Another 11 in which Greek is spoken. Now, I don't know if I would be able to understand that Greek. But then there was Moldavian. Okay, not too long ago there were areas that was just Yiddish speaking. Okay, so the Ukraine is this polyglot thrown together region which has suffered tremendously. I don't take that away from it. Okay, and they do have their own language, so to speak, and it's an incipient nationalism. Okay, but based on the fact that there's a Latin church, there's a Uniate church, and there are 3 Orthodox sects or churches, I don't know how you can get a patriarchate out of that. I really don't. So I'm going to stick with my gut. George, I do thank you. Iron sharpens iron, and I do appreciate it. You may be right. I may be somewhat right, maybe something a little in the middle, don't know. Again, I want more commentary on it. Let's go to the monasteries right now. I don't want to say too much about that. I will say that I really like the civility overall that you all are listening to me on. Dr. Stankovich, I want to compliment you. I should have done this earlier, but last week you wrote something very profound about monasticism, which literally just blew my mind. I thought it was I thought it was the greatest thing I'd ever read in a long time. And you've written some pretty darn good things. But if you can find it and you want to re-put it in there at a more recent thing, I'd appreciate it. It was a profound thing that you wrote about monasticism, and about to give you a hint, you talked about mysterion, the initiation into conjugal union with the husband and the wife, and the same thing that happens with the monastic in his cell or her cell if it's a female monastic. It reminds me of something I read in Makridis' book on Mount Athos, the gifts of the gifts of the desert, eros maniakos, or an eroticism that's magical. That's maniakos means maniacal in English, but that's not what it means in Greek. Is it? It's a profound eros that certain monastics can experience with the Holy Spirit, which transcends the conjugal union between a man and wife, which in the confines of monogamy, of Christian monogamy, is the ideal and can be quite profound. Okay, not all are called to chastity. Not all are called to monogamy. Okay, but all are called to Christ, and the Church, in her wisdom as the bride of Christ, as our mother, has seen fit to find different avenues for properly ordered eroticism. And Dr. Stankovich, your long discourses really hit the nail on the head. Anyway, enough of that. Pax vobiscum. Let's try to love one another, and adios.